When Mr. Rogers learned that François Clemmons, the man who played the beloved Officer Clemmons, was gay, the gentle host didn't offer a hug or a platitude about acceptance. Not immediately. Instead, he issued a directive that seems to shatter the image of the saintly neighbor we all think we know. He told him to stay in the closet. He said it was for the sake of the show. But Rogers didn't stop there. He then asked Clemmons a question that haunts the legacy of the neighborhood to this day: have you ever thought of getting married? It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood. But is it? Hello everyone, and welcome back to NPA Discovery. We are the channel dedicated to peeling back the layers of history's most iconic figures, looking past the polished veneers to find the complex, often contradictory human beings underneath. We don't just read you the headlines, we analyze the soul of the story. If you're ready to have your childhood heroes examined, deconstructed, and ultimately understood on a deeper level, you are in the right place. Today, we are tackling a titan. Fred Rogers. To many, he is a secular saint. To others, he is a relic of a kinder, slower time. The title of today's video suggests a darkness, a chilling question. I want to address that right now. Do I agree that Fred Rogers was a villain in that moment? No. But do I agree that he was a man bound by the terrifying constraints of his era, forced to make a utilitarian choice that crushed a friend's soul to save a platform that helped millions? Absolutely. This isn't a hit piece. This is a reality check. It is easy to look at a man in a cardigan and see a two-dimensional character. It is much harder, and much more rewarding, to see a man who fought a war against cynicism, fought a war for children's mental health, and occasionally, tragically, had to compromise. Before we unzip this cardigan and dive into the deep end of the neighborhood of make-believe, I need you to do something for me. If you believe that deep, nuanced storytelling matters on YouTube, if you want more than just 10-minute summaries, please hit that like button right now. It tells the algorithm that attention spans aren't dead. Share this video with someone who grew up watching PBS, and subscribe so we have the motivation to keep researching and writing these massive deep dives. Now, let's go back. Before the trolley, before the puppets, and before the red sweater. Let's go back to a lonely, overweight boy in Pennsylvania who just wanted a friend. The wounded healer. To understand the radical empathy of Fred Rogers, we first have to understand the specific, crushing loneliness of his childhood. We often look at successful people and assume they were born with a certain magnetism, a natural charisma that drew people to them. With Fred Rogers, it was the exact opposite. Born in 1928 in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, Fred McFeely Rogers was born into wealth. His father was a successful businessman, running a brick manufacturing company. By all material metrics, Fred won the lottery. He had a large house, servants, and financial security during the Great Depression, a time when 24.9% of the American workforce was unemployed and families were starving. But privilege does not insulate a child from pain. In fact, sometimes it builds a higher wall around it. Fred was a sickly child. He suffered from severe asthma, a condition that, in the 1930s, was terrifying. It meant long nights fighting for breath, confined to his bedroom while other children played outside. But the isolation wasn't just physical, it was social. Fred was shy, sensitive, and yes, overweight. Bullying is not a modern invention. In the schoolyards of Latrobe, Fred was a target. They called him Fat Freddy. I want you to pause and really think about that nickname. It's simple, it's cruel, and for a sensitive boy, it is a label that defines your entire existence. There is a story Fred later told about being chased by a group of boys chanting that name. He ran home, tears streaming down his face, to his grandmother. He expected her to tell him to toughen up, or perhaps she would go scold the boys. Instead, she did something that would plant the seed for his entire philosophy. She didn't deny the reality of his pain, but she reframed his worth. She simply accepted him. But the real champion of his self-worth was his maternal grandfather, Fred McFeely. Grandfather McFeely was an eccentric, joyous man. One day, after a visit, he looked at young Fred, this chubby, asthmatic, shy boy who felt like a burden to the world, and said something profound. You know, you made this day special. Just by being yourself. There's only one person in the whole world like you. This is the rosebud moment of Fred Rogers' life. Psychologists often talk about the concept of unconditional positive regard, a term coined by Carl Rogers, no relation. It is the basic acceptance and support of a person regardless of what they say or do. Fred received this from his grandfather, and it saved him. He realized that he didn't need to be the fastest runner, the funniest joker, or the thinnest kid to have value. He had value simply because he existed. This realization didn't cure his asthma or make the bullies disappear, but it gave him an internal fortress. It allowed him to retreat into his own mind, not as a place of exile, but as a place of creation. He began to play with puppets. He began to tell stories. He sat at the piano and poured his frustration into music. He learned that if the real world was hostile, he could build a better one in his head. This is the origin of the land of make-believe. It wasn't just a TV segment, it was a survival mechanism. By high school, the ugly duckling narrative began to take shape. Fred grew taller, the baby fat melted away, and his confidence, bolstered by that foundational love from his grandfather, began to shine. He became the editor-in-chief of the yearbook. He became student council president. He was popular. But here is the crucial insight: he never forgot what it felt like to be Fat Freddy. Most people, when they overcome childhood trauma and become popular, try to bury the past. They become the bully, or they become indifferent to the outcasts because it reminds them of their own weakness. Fred Rogers did the opposite. He held on to that pain. He enshrined it. He realized that inside every adult, and certainly inside every child, is that scared, lonely kid running home from the playground. He carried that empathy with him to Dartmouth College in 1946, and then to Rollins College in Florida, where he graduated magna cum laude in 1951 with a degree in music composition. He met Sarah Joanne Bird, Joanne, a fellow accomplished musician. They fell in love. His path seemed set. He had the money, the talent, and the connections to become a composer, or perhaps a traditional minister. But then, he turned on a television. The Anti-Television Manifesto. In 1951, television was the Wild West. It was a new, buzzing box sitting in the corner of the American living room. The number of households with TV sets jumped from 9% in 1950 to 23.5% in 1951, a statistical explosion that was reshaping culture in real time. Fred came home for a break during his senior year and watched a children's program. We don't know exactly which one it was, but we know what it featured: people throwing pies in each other's faces. Slapstick. Violence. Mindless noise. Fred was appalled. Most people looked at TV and saw entertainment. Fred Rogers looked at TV and saw a squandered miracle. He saw a device that had the power to reach millions of minds simultaneously, yet it was being used to broadcast humiliation and chaos. He famously said, "I went into television because I hated it so, and I thought there was some way of using this fabulous instrument to nurture those who would watch and listen." This is a critical point of divergence. Fred Rogers didn't enter the industry to become famous. He entered it as a saboteur. He wanted to infiltrate the medium and slow it down from the inside. He landed a job at NBC in New York as a floor director. This was the big leagues. He worked on the Kate Smith Hour and the Gabby Hayes Show. He was learning the mechanics of the beast: lighting, timing, production cues. But the commercialism of NBC suffocated him. He realized that commercial television wasn't interested in the child's well-being, it was interested in selling the child cereal. So, in 1953, he did something that seemed insane to his peers. He quit his prestigious NBC job and moved back to Pittsburgh to work for WQED, the nation's first community-sponsored educational television station. There was no money in it. There was no fame. But there was freedom. At WQED, he partnered with Josie Carey to create the Children's Corner. This was the laboratory, Fred was off camera, playing the organ and voicing puppets, Daniel Striped Tiger, King Friday 13. This allowed him to be the puppeteer of the experience without the pressure of the spotlight. It was here that he began to refine his philosophy, but he knew he was missing something. He knew music, and he knew puppets, but he didn't know children. Not scientifically. So, while working full-time, he enrolled in the Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. He wanted to understand the soul. But simultaneously, he began attending the University of Pittsburgh's Graduate School of Child Development. And there, he met the woman who would become the architect of the neighborhood, Margaret McFarland. The architect of empathy. If Fred Rogers is the face of the neighborhood, Margaret McFarland is the brain. McFarland was a child psychologist who co-founded the Arsenal Family and Children's Center with Dr. Benjamin Spock, the most famous pediatrician in history. She became Fred's mentor, and frankly, his guru. Before McFarland, children's TV was about distraction. McFarland taught Fred that childhood is not a time of innocence, it is a time of intense, terrifying drama. Children deal with complex emotions, rage, jealousy, fear of abandonment, the realization of mortality. McFarland taught Fred about the gap, the space between a child's inner fantasy life and the outer reality. She taught him that anything mentionable is manageable. If you can talk about the monster under the bed, the monster shrinks. Fred would meet with McFarland every week for decades. He would pitch show ideas to her, and she would analyze them with clinical precision. Fred, I want to do a show about fire. Margaret, be careful. Fire consumes. Children are afraid of being consumed. You must show that the fire is contained, that the helpers are there. This collaboration is why Mr. Rogers' neighborhood feels different. It isn't entertainment, it is therapy. Every script was vetted to ensure it didn't inadvertently traumatize a child. For example, when Fred puts on a sweater, he buttons it from the bottom up. Why? Because Margaret told him that young children, who are just learning to dress themselves, usually start from the bottom. If he buttoned it top down, he might discourage them. When he feeds the fish, he explicitly says, I am feeding the fish. Why? Because a child wrote in once, worried the fish were hungry. Fred realized that if he didn't narrate the action, the child's anxiety would block the lesson. This level of intentionality is staggering. In an era where cartoons were dropping anvils on coyotes, Fred Rogers was worrying about whether a child might think they could be sucked down the bathtub drain. Yes, he wrote a song about that, You Can Never Go Down the Drain. Rogers had a prepared statement. He looked at Pastor, looked at the paper, and put the paper down. He spoke from the heart. He didn't talk about money. He didn't talk about ratings. He talked about the inner drama of childhood. He looked a sitting U.S. Senator in the eye and said, This is what I give. I give an expression of care every day to each child, to help him realize that he is unique. I feel that if we in public television can only make it clear that feelings are mentionable and manageable, we will have done a great service for mental health. Pastor was listening. The room went silent. Then Fred recited the lyrics to a song. Not a patriotic anthem, but a song about managing anger. What do you do with the mad that you feel? What do you do with the mad that you feel / when you feel so mad you could bite, / when the whole wide world seems oh, so wrong, / and nothing you do seems very right? He finished the lyrics. Senator Pastor, known as a hard-nosed cynic, looked at this gentle man. His face softened. The armor cracked. Pastor said, famously, I'm supposed to be a pretty tough guy, and this is the first time I've had goosebumps for the last 2 days. Then, the verdict, looks like you just earned the $20 million. This is one of the most stunning moments in political history. It wasn't a debate, it was an emotional conversion. Rogers proved that softness is not weakness, it is a different kind of strength. He disarmed a politician not with force, but with relentless sincerity. With the funding secured, the show exploded. It became a national phenomenon. But as the platform grew, so did the responsibility. And this brings us back to the chilling question. To understand why Fred Rogers, a man who preached that, you are special just the way you are, would force a gay man back into the closet, we have to look at the cold, hard statistics of 1968. We have to look at the pool. The pool, the officer, and the compromise. It was 1969. The summer was hot. The racial tension was hotter. Across the United States, swimming pools were a battleground for segregation. In many cities, Black Americans were legally or socially barred from swimming in white public pools. In 1964, a hotel manager in St. Augustine, Florida, famously poured acid into a pool while black and white activists were swimming in it. Fred Rogers wanted to send a message. But he didn't want to preach. He wanted to demonstrate. He invited Officer Clemmons, played by François Clemmons, a gifted opera singer and a black man, to rest his feet in a plastic kiddie pool on the set. It was a hot day in the neighborhood. Fred was soaking his feet. He invited Officer Clemmons to join him. Clemmons accepted. He rolled up his pant legs. He put his brown feet in the water next to Fred's pale white feet. To a child, it was two friends cooling off. To an adult in 1969, it was a radical political statement. It was a baptism of brotherhood. When Clemmons had to leave, Fred took a towel and dried Clemmons' feet. The biblical imagery here is unmistakable. Jesus washing the feet of the disciples. The master serving the servant. It was an act of profound humility and equality. But behind the scenes, a different drama was playing out. François Clemmons was gay. In 1968, homosexuality was not just stigmatized, it was criminalized in many states. It was classified as a mental illness by the American Psychiatric Association, until 1973. Statistical context: in the late 60s, public approval of homosexuality was virtually non-existent. A 1969 Gallup poll didn't even ask about gay marriage because the concept was so foreign. But regarding interracial marriage, only 20% of Americans approved in 1968. Fred was already pushing the envelope on race. Pushing it on sexuality was seen as institutional suicide. Fred Rogers knew Clemmons was gay. He met him at a church. But Fred was pragmatic. He knew that the funding for the show, the Sears Roebuck money, the PBS money, came from conservative corporate boards and a government that was openly hostile to deviance. So, he had the conversation. He told Clemmons, "Frank, you have talents that rarely exist in the world. But if you're going to be on the show, you cannot be out as gay." He warned him that if he was seen at a gay bar, the sponsors would pull the plug. The show would die. The message of love would be silenced. Then came the question, have you ever thought of getting married? He pushed Clemmons toward a heterosexual marriage as a cover. Clemmons, desperate to keep his role and respecting Fred as a father figure, complied. He married a woman in 1968. It was a disaster. The marriage fell apart by 1974. It caused immense pain to Clemmons and his wife. This is the part of the story that makes us uncomfortable. We want our heroes to be perfect. We want Fred Rogers to have marched in pride parades in 1969. But he didn't. He sacrificed Clemmons' personal truth to protect the show's universal truth. Was it cowardly? Or was it a calculation that the world wasn't ready, and that losing the show would be a greater tragedy for American children? Clemmons himself later forgave Fred. He understood the stakes. He said, "Lord have mercy, if I had been seen in a gay bar, it would have been the end of the program." Years later, as culture shifted, Fred evolved. He became more open. When Clemmons eventually came out and lived his truth, Fred supported him personally. But the scar of that initial rejection remains a part of history. It reminds us that progress is often bought at the expense of the pioneers. Clemmons had to hide part of himself so that black children across America could see a police officer who looked like them, who was kind, and who was loved by his white neighbor.